Let's make a new plaster slip casting mold. In particular, I want to make a mold for this form here. To do that, I'll use Shapecast, which is my software that lets you create 3D printable molds to pour plaster into. In particular, it creates forms like this that you can 3D print. This here is the shape of the vessel that I'm interested in, only it's been scaled up to account for my clay shrinkage and has a slip well added onto it. But otherwise they're the same. Shapecast also provides a couple of other parts to the mold system. It has a couple of outer mold pieces that replace cauda boards and make the plaster nice. It has a ring to connect them together, and it has a bunch of features in these to be able to assemble them very easily. In particular, it has a bunch of ridges and grooves. And the idea is that we want to make one of these. So once we assemble the mold, we pour plaster, and then we can demold it. Take off the bottom ring. Take off the outer mold, and we'll pull the inner mold out. And we have something to pour slip into. Of course, I already have one of these, so why am I making another? Well, actually, I want to make one that's slightly different. Recently with Shapecast, I introduced the ability to upgrade to get to high-resolution STLs and step files. The intent was to be able to give people who know 3D modeling the ability to make some modifications to their molds. So what I want to do in this video is actually try some of those modifications. So this here is the form that I started with, and I made this one. What I did is I modified the foot. I added this kind of star pattern on here where it slightly steps down. These layers are relatively small. Also, we still have to worry about draft angles, so I figured the foot was a good place to start. Basically, we can just pull straight out and we don't have to worry about that too much, unlike modifying the sides. I think we can do that too, but that'll be a future video. And because these are exactly the same form except for the foot modifications, that means I can reuse my 3D printed outer mold as well. I really didn't do much to this to prep it for making the mold. I sanded the outside a little bit to get some of the 3D printed artifacts off the outside, but otherwise it's basically good to go off to printer. I removed the supports as well. When you print the supports, there's a little bit of a gap here that we'll use in a second to secure it to the ring. Make sure your supports are only on the bed, otherwise pulling them out of there is a little bit annoying. That's one of the few tricks. All right, so let's go ahead and assemble this so we can get ready for plaster. So the ring goes on first. I'll use a bunch of binder clips to secure things together. And I tend to put binder clips as many as will fit. Basically just cheap insurance against a plaster disaster. It probably doesn't actually take this many, but they're really easy to put on. All right, there's the ring attached to the inner form. And the reason this is a separate piece is when it comes to demolding, it's very handy to be able to pull straight off. All right, and the outer mold pieces go just like that. Secure these loosely in place. And we want to get this corner, make sure it's nice and tight. And then we'll just fill out the rest of the binder clips. There we go, one fully assembled mold. It's just that easy. And of course what we're going to do is pour plaster into here. The question is how much plaster? Well, this is one of the nice things about Shapecast is it actually does all that math for you. So this here is a README that gets generated with the files. While I modified the foot, the modifications are really small, so I just used the original one for this form here. It says we're going to need 1.71 liters of plaster to fill up this cavity, which otherwise would be really hard to figure out. And given that, it went ahead and calculated the amount of dry plaster we need and the amount of water. So we need 1.7 kilograms of dry plaster and 1.22 kilograms of water. That will give us the proper ratio of plaster to the water as well. So with the mold ready to go, I think I'm going to go ahead and reset and get ready for plaster. I'll go ahead and slake it for 3.5 minutes and mix it for 4, and then we can pour the new mold. All right, that's 4 minutes. tap out some of the bubbles. All right, we're ready to pour. And slow and steady. Up to the top. And we got a little bit of plaster left over. That's by design. Don't want to run out. Tap out the bubbles. All right, this will take about 45 minutes to set. In the meantime, let me do a quick walkthrough of how I made this form, in particular how I modified the foot. So here is a 3D model. As I mentioned, you can get this as a step file or as an STL, depending upon your workflow, if you use the Pro version of Shapecast. So I went ahead and opened this in FreeCAD, and this is how it comes from the software. And what we want to do is modify the foot. And you can do this all in CAD, but for me, since this is basically going to be a 2.5D design, basically I'm just going to recess the foot a little bit. I went ahead into Inkscape to draw this up. So this is what I drew up. I basically have all of these little scallop patterns, and each one's a different color. To do this, I used the polygon tool. And then just drug out the shape and played around with the parameters until I liked it. And so there's a bunch of concentric versions of these going out. And I shaded it in so that they get turned into faces as opposed to just wires. The other thing I did was actually imported the original SVG and drew these boxes here. And these were basically landmarks for going in and out. So this curve here is actually the original foot, and I drew all these little boxes that match the curve of the foot. That way I could tweak the size of each of these. And the idea was that the steps going in would more or less mimic the progression going inward as well. That was really just a design choice. I'm mostly just playing around here to see what works and what makes sense. So from there, I imported the SVG, and this looks funny because they're all stacked on top of each other. So here is just the largest one, and we can see how that maps onto the pot. I then extruded that downwards. Of course, you can't see that because of the pots there. So just like that. And here I was using the settings from my printer for the extrude. So I went down 0.24 millimeters. So basically on my fine setting, I go down 0.08. So this is 3 layers thick. I then cut that out of the bottom of the pot, did the next one, and the next one, and so on until I had all of them. Just like that. And then the other thing I did, since we're cutting in a little bit, is I made the inside a little bit thicker as well. So this face here, and that just so that the 3D print didn't get any thinner. I didn't want it any thinner. And I didn't change any of the rest of the geometry, so all the rest of the Shapecast features work as is. It really is just this foot difference. So I printed it out, and that's what you saw me use for this pour. All right, the plaster setting. I'll give it a while longer, and we'll come back for the demolding. All right, the plaster is cooling down and all set. It's been maybe an hour or so. Let's go ahead and start the demolding process. To that, we just need to remove the binder clips. And then the ring just comes straight off. That's why it's a separate piece. And then the outer mold splits as well. Also why it's a separate piece. Just like that, there's the plaster. And there's usually a little lip right here from pouring it. Just the meniscus from the plaster itself. And we have a very slight seam line. So I just take a knife and quickly clean that up. There we go, just like that. For a regular mold, I will usually demold it at this point. However, since I have all those fine surface details in the bottom, I think I'm going to go ahead and let this cure for a while longer. It's been a few more hours. This is definitely still damp, and will probably take a few days to actually fully cure and dry. But I think I'm going to go ahead and try and demold it. To do that, I use this here. This is a mixture of isopropyl alcohol and some water. It's maybe 50-75% isopropyl alcohol. And this I keep in my freezer, and the idea is that this will stay liquid at freezer temperatures, but still be very cold. I'll pour that into the inner mold here. That will cause it to shrink just a little bit so it releases. Usually this happens pretty quick. Oh, I think I just heard it. Yep. There we go. All right, so first impressions, we definitely caught some plaster in the mold itself, which is not too surprising. Yeah, these are pretty fine structures, so I wasn't sure how well it would do. Probably bigger features is a good idea. And then you can see down there, we caught one bubble I see. And obviously we're missing some of the design, but I'll go ahead and let this dry out. It'll take a few days to cure, and then we can try it and see how it works. The mold is dry. Let's go ahead and slip cast a pot. My slip is all mixed up, so let's just go ahead and put some in. Just like that. I'll go ahead and let this sit for about 25 minutes so that the pop forms, and then we'll dump out the excess slip. All right, the pop's formed, and I've pulled out my slip drainage table. And set it here at a diagonal to go ahead and drain the rest of the way. All right, everything's ready to demold now. Let's go ahead and trim the slip well. Use a piece of cardboard to pull it out. It came no problem. And there we go. I think that worked out pretty well overall, knowing that we had a little bit of problems with the plaster. Definitely is the pattern there. We've lost some detail in some places, so it's not exactly clean, but overall, I think that's not a bad for a first attempt. I think what I really need to do is to enlarge these features so they're bigger, and then probably add some draft angles to them. That way the plaster doesn't get stuck and it will be easier to release. One of the things I was a little bit worried about was the clay not releasing from the plaster, but that wasn't a problem at all. It came out nice and clean. So this worked just fine for the clay. What we really need to improve is the 3D print and the plaster, and making sure that we get a good imprint from the plaster on the print. But overall, for a first attempt modifying the foot, I think that is a good start. I think I might go ahead and try and make those changes and try again, but that'll be a future video. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.